Hey there, everybody. Thank you so much for swinging back by and checking us out today on Todd-Bits. What a great month we're having. What a great guest we have on today, back for her second time. Yes, it's true. I did not piss her off the first time enough to get her to come back a second time. She didn't bring grandma, but I've got her here. Please, everybody, give it up for our friend in beautiful Washington, D.C., the managing director of Groundswell Strategies, Carmen Rottenberg. Welcome, welcome, welcome back.
Thank you, Todd. It's good to be here.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled that you're here. I enjoyed our conversation last time so very much, and got such great feedback from everybody. They were so impressed with the dialogue about what goes on in DC. So I thought, hey, what a better time to have you come in. The administration's been around a year. Got a little color in the backdrop for you. I know
we're
it's
ready.
cold. Yeah, I know you're ready. It's a little chilly back there. Yeah, February in DC tends to be a touch chilly. I'm blending in a little bit to the backdrop though today, but that's all right.
And I love that LPGA hoodie that you're wearing there. Big golf fans in my family.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I am too. I'm a lifelong golf fan, a huge fan of the LPGA based on when I was a kid and got to meet up close and personal with one of the really major stars and really impacted me in a big way with the sport and especially with the girls sport. But this hoodie is really important to me and it's something we support. It's actually a charity called Hoodie for Golf, and it's a really cool foundation. It's a really cool process they're going through, and we support it here. And I hope, I'm going to talk about it now that you brought it up, but it grants golf programs to increase participation for girls in Black communities. And anytime we can do something to put sports in front of people that don't have that opportunity, I am all in. And the backstory on this is, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent before we get started, but the backstory on this, I would encourage everybody to get on the Google machine and type in Clearview Golf Club in Ohio and read this history and the story of what this all is. It's fantastic. And so anyways, thank you. So we're just throwing some love out there and keeping the goodwill going. I thought, hey, it makes me kind of look like kind of like a cherry blossom in some ways.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking about it. But welcome once again. Like I said, I'm just really thrilled that you're here. I think there's a lot to talk about. We talked, months and months back ago, and the administration's trying to get under their feet a little bit, where things are at. Here we are in February, and they've been going at it for a year now. They know which way. They know where the vending machine is in the hallways now. They know where to go. So I wanted to kind of just check in with you and talk about what's going on from an ag position, because I think your lens is so incredible because you're not in, you're in the game, but you're not a part of the current administration in that respect. So you can see things from a multiplicity of angles. So, but before we get going, just tell everybody who you are and introduce yourself and give everybody a little bio, and we'll take it from there.
So as Todd mentioned, I'm the managing director and owner of Groundswell Strategy, which is a company that really assists folks that are in the ag sector with regulatory issues. So with navigating the regulatory landscape, overcoming hurdles, operating within existing regulatory structures, and then also sometimes advocating for new policy as well. I spent 13 years at USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service and was at the Federal Trade Commission for a few years before that. So I have a long history in the federal government. Left 2 years ago from federal government in order to form this new consulting firm. And really, I branched out to do consulting work because I saw that there was a real need for folks that had experience in the government with doing this sort of, regulatory work. There's lots of lobbyists in DC. And of course, I do some lobbying. And, when you think of classic lobbying, you're trying to influence members of Congress or influence members of the administration. But there's a huge section of work that goes on in regulatory agency that has nothing to do with either of those things. And so that's the niche that I fill.
I love it. And again, it's that perspective, right? You come from being inside the game to coming out and now having that perspective to give back, which I think is so important, because there's so many critical issues out there that I think sometimes in a lot of ways, and I think you would agree, sometimes they lack perspective. Yeah. And I think that it's important that we have those voices there, and you're representing, your clients to make sure their voices are at the table, they're being heard and understanding what's in the fine print of a lot of things. So before we go, I do want to ask, so what's new at Groundswell? Because I know you have some kind of breaking news that we're sharing here with our audience.
I'm so excited. So I started Groundswell in April of 2020, and it was just me for about 18 months. But I just brought on a senior director for government affairs. Her name is Anna Osterlund Jones, and I met her at USDA when she was doing congressional work. But she was Bruce Summers' chief of staff over at AMS after she worked with me prior to at USDA. Prior to her time at USDA, she had some time with a startup in California, and she's got Great Hill experience with the senator from her home state of Missouri. So I'm thrilled to have her on board. She's very, very smart and just fantastic strategist. So she's perfect for Groundswell.
I love it. I think that's fantastic. Congratulations. It's good to
Thank you
see.
so much.
It's good to see the good guys winning. I appreciate that. I love it. I love
Yeah,
it. So
yeah.
let's get into it. Let's go to the first, kind of my first question. How is this current administration different in ag, just an ag as a total, not
Yeah.
whatever, just ag, AG,
Right.
than the previous administration?
Well, I worked in the government over multiple administrations of different parties, and I think that my focus is really on the career folks in the agencies who don't change in each political administration, and I think that that gets lost sometimes in what we
Hmm.
see in the news media, right? So, the executive branch of the government, as it relates to food safety, which is really my niche, I work a lot with Food Safety and Inspection Service at USDA and APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and then folks at FDA. The food safety world just sort of keeps marching along in the same direction, regardless of change in administration. What we do see is sometimes a difference in messaging. And so,
Right.
in the messaging in the current administration is really how can the agriculture industry solve problems related to climate and sustainability? What are best practices around worker safety and occupational health? The pandemic has definitely increased those conversations in terms of how do we keep employees safe across ag, and so we're seeing a lot about that. This administration has a really close connection with United Food and Commercial Workers, and so we see a real nod to labor unions
Hmm.
and labor unions really driving policy. And Secretary Bill Sack, who's current Secretary of Ag, is very, very focused on regional food systems, and he was focused on that in the Obama administration too. I think that recognizing that there's an important it's important to look both at who's producing the most food because we need to
Hmm.
feed people, but then how can we make sure that local communities have access to safe and affordable food? And then there's the additional group of people who really has an interest in buying and supporting local manufacturers of food, producers of food, and this administration wants to help those folks succeed. So I
Right. Yeah.
think that's what I really see.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a few invitations to sit through some of the rural stakeholder meetings that the White House has had, and it's
Yeah,
a very interesting
yeah,
conversation. When you're talking about broadband, you're talking about kind of the food desert mantra. But something you said, and I want to just touch on because I think it's super important to point out, and folks remember the career people that are at the USDA and in the government. Every
yeah,
4 years or every 8 years,
yeah.
up here changes, but down here, the people in the trenches that are working every day for this country, you don't really change, and they're there,
No,
and they're
right.
the unsung heroes. They really, truly are the
Yeah.
unsung heroes of our government. They're in some ways, and I don't mean this in any disrespect, they're nameless and faceless in a lot of ways, and they do everything. They're so pivotal to the
Mm.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember in the team that was in the last administration came in, and one of the undersecretaries said to me, you know, he came from a state government in ag and said, I always thought that here are the trade folks, the folks that are in charge of trade for USDA. I thought they were responsible for all these great trade deals, but it's really the career people in food safety and in animal plant health inspection service and in ag marketing service who are doing all of the groundwork to get other countries to accept our product. And
Yeah.
I love that recognition because the career people work so hard. And I was a career employee in the federal government for 16 years. And you're right, they're the unsung heroes. They
Hmm.
work very, very hard. And this idea of bureaucracy, it is true that things take time in federal government, and a lot of that is due to changes in administration. And so you have change in some policy. But the career work continues to go on. So how, as a strategist, the way that I help my clients is in looking at the new administration's priorities, how can I align my clients' work that's been going on sometimes for decades, but how can
Sure.
I message that in a way that resonates with the new administration in order to get things done?
Right.
And that's what people like me in Washington D.C. do, and it can be really effective if you look at it from that lens, and if
Oh,
you know the
absolutely.
people.
Well, yeah, 100%. You got to know the, yeah.
Yeah,
What,
yeah, yeah.
how many people are USDA? Like
100,000.
140,000? Yeah,
Yeah,
100,000,
yeah,
whatever it is. Like,
100,000. Yeah,
yeah.
10,000 at FSIS. So yeah.
Wow. Well, so I guess I'm going to throw another question at you. And I'm probably going to throw two questions at you because they kind of go together and let you run with just however you want to take it. But
Yeah.
there's some major issues you touched on a few that they're wanting to try to fix currently. And I guess my second part of it, because of the process that's involved, right? Everybody's got to get along to make things happen. In DC, which doesn't necessarily happen on a daily basis. But what's the reality of some of these things getting fixed and resolved? Because I think sometimes we get into this thing like, here's an issue, and we keep talking about an issue. And I say this all the time, but like we talk about this issue, and we never get it resolved. And
Yeah.
what's the reality of some of these things that you're throwing out there? So I know it's kind of a really broad question, but I'll let you run with it and see what your thoughts
Yeah.
are.
So one issue that I'm going to start by answering the question this way, and that I think the media, and I think I said this last time I was on also, I think the media makes it seem like we're all a lot further apart than we actually are in this country, which is really unfortunate. And I
Yeah.
think the 24-hour news cycle has only added to that, which is why podcasts and programs like the one that you're putting on is so important, because you really do, I think, see from week to week with the folks you're putting on that there's a lot more that binds us than divides us. So I'll
Thank
start by
you.
saying that. Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I think one of there are many issues that new administrations try to sort of take credit for. I mean, let's look at climate and sustainability. I work a lot in the meat and poultry sector, and the meat and
Mhm.
poultry companies have been looking for how to be the solution for the last 20 years. Just because the previous administration maybe doesn't talk all that much about it doesn't mean that individual private companies aren't doing the work. And so having a new administration come in and set targets and commit internationally to certain metrics, I think that's great. But let's not forget that the individual work from the companies has been going on for many years. So in that case, you have administrations that can sort of claim credit for things that are going on.
Mhm.
And I think that's okay. It's just we need to have that recognition. A big issue that I really think needs to get fixed in the very short term is immigration reform, and we hear about this. We hear about this from almost every sector, and it's important to have a labor force in this country that has paths to citizenship, that has that is treated fairly, and workers are paid what they're worth. And these are areas that I think there is broad bipartisan support for what I'm talking about, but Congress has to get that to the finish line. The executive branch
Mhm.
can't necessarily do that. And it's frustrating to, especially in the produce industry, to sit on in some roundtables and sessions with some of the larger trade associations for produce and hear companies talk about the fact that they've been working on this for 20 years, to try to get immigration reform.
Mhm.
So that's something that I think this administration could make as a priority, and I hope that they do. But it's something that's got to change.
Yeah, well, it goes back to what I just said earlier, right? We keep talking about an issue, we don't resolve it, and
Yeah,
and immigration's massive. I mean, we don't want to say it's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem, and it's a
mhm,
problem that we keep for again 20 years we can't get it solved. And I'm at the point now when it comes to with the conversation about immigration, it's like, why don't we just solve something, and the ag industry will adapt,
yes,
make it work, and move forward.
100%, Todd.
Yeah,
Completely agree with that.
yeah.
Complete- In any with any policy change, you are not going to make 100% of people happy, right? But there are ways and in some cases, you may make everyone in ag happy, but then make some other constituencies unhappy. But a huge part of that is how you message it, right?
Hmm.
How you package it and how you message it. Rural broadband is another. is another issue. Of course, Sonny Perdue at Department of Ag in the last administration made that a priority. It's a priority in this administration. It is not it's not a moneymaker, the last mile, right, of broadband in rural America. But we live in a country that should be able to subsidize that last mile in a way that's going to provide access to all Americans.
Great.
And when you live in a place like DC, people just don't understand that these issues that are out in rural America, in many metropolitan areas, folks forget and or they don't know. They just it's a lack of awareness. So we got to do more education.
Yeah, I agree. And you brought up a good point. It just popped a thought into my head. The way our system works, and it's by far, in a lot of ways, the greatest system that's on the planet today, right? Because of what it provides and the opportunities it provides
Yes.
and the conversation it is allowed to have. But the system kind of is one side always wins, one side always loses, right? So it continues to have this divide. And then, when you take a look at bills that, a bill that could be 5 pages is 500 pages because of all the things that go on to it, it starts to get really, really cloudy. I was talking to somebody the other day, and it struck me. It's like, wouldn't it be great if Congress had to pass everything with a 90% approval rating where everybody got along and everybody got to the finish line together? Yes, you can't be at 100%, but wouldn't it, and I think that's something these guys have got to start to think about is like, I think we get too caught up in the wins and the losses and not at the overall victory that we're trying to seek.
This episode of Todd-versations is brought to you by Dohi Marketing and Branding. Let us be your growth hive. Learn more at dohi.io.
I think that the way that you put that is exactly what we see play out in the polling, Todd. I mean, people are the average American is really frustrated with the government. And I think that the way that they believe that they're frustrated with it is not actually the reason why they're frustrated with it. I mean, the government works to the extent that services are provided and folks can get access to many of those services. But there's so much more that we could do if we're doing it together, right? And there's so much the media is a part of it, but also just in terms of, like you said, how politicized things become because members of Congress make them political.
Right.
Or administrations make them political.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it goes back to the win. It's could be considered tribal. It's my team wins, your team didn't win. Got to win. And I just don't see how that wins the day anymore because the machine has gotten to be so big that it's almost like we have to ratchet it down a little bit to garner that common sense. And immigration reform is a prime example, I think, of that. Is like, let's work to solve it. 20 years, you just can't be doing something for 20 years and not get resolution. If a business was struggling for 20 years to find a resolution, they wouldn't be in business past the 18th year, right? They'd be gone after 2. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. And an issue like immigration reform really gets to lots of other issues too. So if you can solve that or at least come to some kind of compromise on it, like you said, there's, maybe don't make everyone doesn't achieve exactly what they're looking for, but industry will adapt and there are other benefits to it.
100%.
Other social and policy issues.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, switch gears a little bit off of that and just talk about the supply thing a little bit. And the reason I want to bring this up, I've been active in the conversation. I've been down to the port in Los Angeles, and I've stood up on top of the rooftop of a fairly tall building and looked out across the entire, from San Pedro all the way down to Long Beach. 6 boats, fully stacked, no cranes moving, stuff everywhere. It is a bit of a mess. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. Infrastructure-wise, things that they should change, especially here in California, that just don't seem to get that conversation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what's being said in Washington about the supply issues, but from the perspective of maybe not what everybody's hearing on the evening news or getting that news feed. Do you have some insight and a little bit of that groundswell strategy thought process on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have several thoughts on this, and you touched on part of it. The United States has been very successful in some recent trade negotiations for export, which is fantastic. I think sometimes it's reported that, we're not, maybe the shelf is empty here in the United States for something I want, but these companies are making all this money by shipping it elsewhere. But if you look at the meat and poultry sector in particular, there are so many products that U.S. consumers don't eat that are still part of the animal and are edible parts of the animal that are USDA inspected. And so it's great to have a market for those kinds of products overseas. And that's a sustainable practice, because if you don't use that part of the animal, it's going to end up in a landfill or it's going to be waste, right? And so it's fantastic that the U.S. government has aided in getting access for those products overseas. But as a result of that, you have some infrastructure issues at ports, and you have an aging system that hasn't necessarily kept up with that, which is why I think many of us would love to see an infrastructure package that deals with some of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that there are transportation issues right now. We've talked about immigration reform, but labor is a really, really big challenge in this country. And I don't just mean labor like in manufacturing facilities or harvesting crops or harvesting animals. I also mean truck drivers and folks who work at ports and inspectors. And so I think you have all of these things. It's a confluence of factors that you can't, just like inflation, you can't just pin that on any single thing. But demand is very high right now at the grocery store. So lots of people still are nervous to go out to eat, and lots of people found that they could feed their families really good quality food in their homes and are continuing to do that. Yeah. So we see very, very high consumer demand. We see lack of infrastructure in some places, aging infrastructure and transportation, and all of those things coming together have created these kind of backlogs. There also are, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens as we emerge from this pandemic and really get into an endemic phase, which is, what you see with things like the flu or other kind of viruses that become endemic in society, how things change. But I definitely think that the federal government is going to have to do some soul searching in terms of, how to ease regulatory burden or other or advance infrastructure moving forward, because there's not all that's infrastructure. Todd, is another area that for decades you've heard presidents talk about a need to improve infrastructure, and just we haven't done it.
Yeah,
got to make.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. We haven't. It's one of those things that I hope that this current scenario that we're living under now, they put the right people in the room to solve this problem. And I think that's going to be really important. I mean, I would love to see the husband and wife that are truck driving out of the central part of the United States, making $50K a year, driving a 2008 truck, that are trying to go, that want to that are in the room saying, this is what the reality of it is. Right. Here's what it really feels like. You don't, and I think that's bringing that perspective is so important to some of these issues now.
Yeah. And back to a point you made earlier about the idea of wins and losses. I mean, in an issue like infrastructure, you have members of Congress across this country that could take those as wins for getting infrastructure in their state that is necessary, in terms of commerce movement between states. It just feels like it's an issue that should be, of course, it's costly. And so we need to figure out, we need to be stewards of taxpayer money and figure out how to make that work. But I agree with you that I think smart minds and real perspectives can generate a package that both sides could be victorious on.
Yeah, I'd love to see these issues get to the finish line. I really would, because I think it would I think it's going to tremendously change the trajectory of this country. All positive.
Yeah. Totally agree.
I don't see. I see. It's all positive that we need to get into. Yeah, I thank you for sharing it from that perspective. I appreciate it. What do you think? You think about what's the hottest issue? What's the biggest hot button topics right now in ag? Do you think? I mean, we talked about immigration for sure, but I mean, is there some other ones that are out there? I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yes, there's a lot of moving parts. I still think that COVID is large and center right now for agriculture. For the country. And that's why I mentioned moving from pandemic to endemic. I think that the public health messaging GAO just came out with a report about Health and Human Services, putting it on the high risk category. And part of the reason being that the public health messaging has been a real challenge for HHS these last couple of years, and that's across administrations. I don't think that can be blamed on either administration, but there are challenges there, and that's going to have long lasting effects. So I also think that crosses over to agriculture, the public health messaging, and COVID is just looming large. Demand is at an all-time demand is very high right now. The industry, I think, can leverage that into, especially on the produce side and on the meat side too. But we're making healthy options for your family, and ag is the solution to some of these challenges. But we're still seeing outbreaks across the country. We're still seeing not the acceptance of vaccines the way that I think public health officials wish we were. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of agriculture and rural communities. And so I really think that it's still looming large. I hope that there can be a bit of a course correct in public health messaging so that we can find a way forward, as a country can find a way forward to be living with this among us, because COVID's not going to go away.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you take a look at this from a branding marketing strategy perspective, it was not done. It wasn't done well. All of it, and I think that's thrown us for a curve. I think it's part of the problem is that we've not been direct and good and honest and open with messaging and solutions, on how to move forward. Yeah, I agree with that. So when you think about ag, coming up this year, in 2022, policy is obviously, a big word to throw into that. So what's it look like for ag policy and even implementation of ag policy this year?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a series of rulemakings. I think that we'll see the strengthening organic enforcement rule be finalized. And, that's been 20 years, maybe 20 years in the making.
Yeah.
Which is great. The proposal had some, I know you've had Jenny Tucker on from National Organic Program. She is fantastic. And I know that USDA will take the comments into consideration. The proposal was long. There are some things that need to be clarified, and I am confident that USDA will do that. But I think we'll see that come out, and that'll have some impact on organic, especially for imports of organic product. And I think that's really exciting. On the food safety side, there's a real government shift to trying to get better attribution data. What are the things that make people sick most often? I think there's going to be a greater push for data, and part of that is also because of the pandemic, in terms of realizing that the government does not do a great job. They do a good job of collecting some data, but what they do with that data, I think, has been an open question. And the difference between the states and the federal government and what that interface is, I think we're going to see some changes coming out of the pandemic there. But certainly on salmonella, E. coli, especially as we look at leafy greens. I think we're going to definitely see some new food safety guidance and regulations coming out of both FSI, USDA, and FDA. Additional FSMA implementation, which is going to be wrapped up in that in terms of water sourcage and reporting. And then I do think that there is going to be this continued focus on worker safety and health. And I think that we're going to see, we've seen OSHA try to come out with the emergency temporary standard, which didn't pass the Supreme Court's muster, didn't think it was going to. But that doesn't mean that they can't still propose rules, right? They just can't do it under an emergency temporary standard, meaning an emergency temporary standard means you can roll out a rule without taking public comment. And the Supreme Court has said, no, you can't do that. So they're going to go through a regular rulemaking process. And so we'll see that. And I think that this continued focus on the safety of employees, OSHA has had a reduction in its workforce for a number of years. And so I think that we'll see them try to increase their numbers there. And that has an impact on ag pretty directly.
Sure.
The ag industry has been in the crosshairs for some of the administrations placing blame.
I love it. Thank you. What about long term though? What about over the next several years? Is there some things that you think that are kind of on the back of the burner that's going to get drug forward that are going to be something we're going to be talking about in 2024 or whatever 2023?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this idea of data and how we use it is going to
Hmm.
be that this country is behind in terms of data collection and analysis and how we use the data that we get. And of course, private entities are doing a lot of this work themselves in order to. The agriculture industry is an incredibly efficient industry because it has to be. That's the margins are really, really thin, and so it has to be an efficient industry. But the government needs to do a better job of utilizing data in order to make policy decisions. And I think that's true on the public health side. I think it's true on food safety. I think it's true on worker health. So I think we're going to continue to see that.
Cool. Well, that's certainly positive. And of course, we live in a world where everybody can spell data now by the age of 3, I think.
Yeah,
An algorithm. Those are all
yeah.
words that kids, yeah, it's now in the
No,
vocabulary.
it's true though. I mean, technology is moving so quickly in certain industries, and I think agriculture started late in the game, but things are getting automated at a more and more rapid pace, and the agriculture industry and the federal government that regulates the ag industry needs to play a little bit of catch up.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, on this platform, we're working and talking and doing stuff with a lot of these ag startup companies, these companies that have bringing
Yeah,
technology and data and
yeah.
whatever you want to call it today. And I have learned a tremendous amount. There are some really really cool things
It's exciting.
going on. It really
Yeah,
is. It's almost a little bit like the Wild Wild West, right? It's just like all of a sudden it's Ag 2.0. Whether and this is
yeah,
above and beyond just whether it's a vertical farming type of thing, but these are
yeah,
guys that are extracting data from sprinkler pipes, and they're looking at
yeah.
all kinds of different things. I mean, it's fascinating to me. We've got some really cool shows coming up that are really going to focus on some of this stuff, and I'm excited about them because I get into these stories with you. It's like your mouth
Yeah.
drops. Like, what? It's like, what did you wake up on a Saturday, have a cup of coffee, and go, "Oh, let's do this." It's
No,
great.
I totally agree with you, and I'm fortunate to have a couple of ag tech clients, and it's fantastic. I mean, the reg system was not necessarily regulatory statutes were not necessarily written in order to encompass some of these technologies, but many of the statutes are also flexible enough that we can work within the existing statutes in order to make a difference. But it's incredible.
I
Yeah.
love it. It really is super exciting to watch and see. Any final thoughts or ideas or concerns? Anything up your sleeve you want to drop a bomb? I know I have to address because I'm going to get asked. Grandma didn't come on today. I'm a little bit disappointed we didn't get Grandma on. I know Grandma's 96. I think you told
I'll
me
be nice.
now. 90. Yeah,
Yeah,
Grandma's
she'll be
96. We
96
couldn't
this
get her,
summer. Yeah.
but I got to figure out a way to get Grandma on because I just think I just 20 minutes with Grandma will be an absolute kick in the ass. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. Well, grandma is almost 96. And if I happen to be in Denver where she lives, if I happen to be in Denver where she lives when we're doing a podcast, I can have her on with me.
Next time you're going to Denver, we're doing a podcast. That's what I just heard you say.
All right, you got it, Todd.
But no, any kind of final thoughts or anything that you see that you want to leave us with, a tidbit?
No, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. So I really appreciate the opportunity and you having me on.
Yeah. Oh, it's it's my pleasure. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I love what you do, and I love from the perspective that you do it from because I've being around you and spending time with you and listening to you and how you look at things. You're the kind of voice and eyes and perspective that we need in that beltway to get the ball down the field. And I appreciate you for what you do and what
Well,
Groundswell's
thank
about.
you. Thank you so much. It's all about the people, Todd, and you have made that front and center of your program. But it is all about the people and connections. At the end of the day, all of this policy is written by human people, and
Yeah.
all of these companies are run by individuals that have faces. And we tend to lose sight of that when we try to vilify certain segments. But people, no matter how much technology and automation, you still need people to drive it.
And that's a good point. We're dropping the Sharpie on that one. That's a
Yeah,
perfect,
that's
perfect
right.
way to end. Thank you again for being here and sharing. And I hope you'll come back for round 3 and technically round 4 with Grandma. I just want to throw that out there. I want to make sure we say that one more time. But one of the things I say all the time, and you've done this beautifully today, especially for me, and I know others are going to listen to this. I talk all the time about inspiring people, right? And we need voices like yours to keep that inspiration up, to keep that positivity in all that we're doing, especially politically, because it's so important. And inspiration is something we can do every day. It's easy to do. So, thank you for that. And like I always say, go inspire somebody. It's really important.
Great. Thanks, Todd.
Cool. Thank you for being here.
All
Thanks, everybody, for hanging out on Todd-Bits. We really do appreciate you. Don't forget, Hoodie for Golf. Get on it. Love it. Next week's show, Sandra Gall with the LPGA Tour. What a positive vibe she gives off, all about love and giving back to the community, giving back to girls. It's a fun thing. It's going to be a great show. Thank you, Carmen, for hanging out with us. I appreciate you, and I will see you probably in DC eventually. Not till it gets warm, though. Not till it gets warm.
When those cherry blossoms come out, I'm going to hold you to it.
Done. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.